My name is Zara, and my memories begin under the scorching sun of northern Sudan, in a house where rules were heavier than the desert heat. I was born into an extremely conservative Muslim family, where every step was measured, every word thought out. My father was a well-known businessman, the kind who spoke little but whose decisions shaped the life of the household. My mother, a silent woman, devoted to home and faith, took care of us with firm hands and a resigned gaze. I was the third of 6 children, raised in a home where obedience was not a choice, it was the only path. We grew up learning that Islam was not just our religion, it defined us. It was the root and the roof, the beginning and the end. Everything passed through it. From a very young age, there was something about the mosque that drew me to it. It wasn't just the faith, although I felt that deeply. It was the atmosphere, the silence, the order, the repetition of the rituals, the measured sound of voices in prayer, the scent of incense that hung in the air like a promise of peace. It was a place where I felt that the world made sense. And at the center of this universe was a figure who fascinated me more than any other, Imam Idris. To many, he was simply their religious guide. To me, he was a kind of second father. He had a calm presence, a low, almost whispering voice, and always exuded a sweet aroma of rose oil mixed with the earthy scent of incense. He knew the Quran by heart, every verse, every word, and often gathered the girls together after prayer to teach us with a patience that seemed infinite. I worked hard to learn, memorizing the surahs with dedication, and I remember vividly the way he smiled when I recited it correctly. That smile made me feel as if I were touching something sacred. It made me believe that I was accomplishing something great in the eyes of Allah. As I grew older, I became increasingly involved in the mosque's activities. At 17, I was helping out in the girls' classes, setting out prayer rugs before prayers, and serving tea at community gatherings. It was a routine that gave me purpose, a sense of belonging. I felt proud to serve. The Imam called me his little daughter of Islam, and I saw that as a sign of affection, a form of recognition. But as time went on, I realized that something was changing. Little things, little gestures that no longer fit with what I knew of him. His gaze, once gentle, became longer, more intense. Sometimes I would catch him watching me with an intensity that chilled me to the core. I tried to ignore it. I told myself that it was just my mind creating fantasies. After all, he was like a father. It was impossible. I refused to believe that there could be another intention there. But it wasn't long before the discomfort became impossible to ignore. He started calling me to talk after class, saying he wanted to share something spiritual, some teaching. One day we were alone in a corner of the mosque, and he held my hands with a touch that made me shiver. His fingers were too firm, his voice too low. He said, "Zara, Allah has given you a rare beauty, a beauty that needs to be protected, and to do so, you must trust in the one who guides you." My words trailed off. I stood there, unsure whether to respond or run away. The ground seemed to give way beneath my feet. I swallowed my uneasiness, silenced the fear that was beginning to rise in my chest like distant thunder. I still wanted to believe that everything was okay, that this was just a misunderstanding. But then the whispers came. Conversations stopped as soon as someone approached. I began to realize that I wasn't the only one feeling this way. Other girls were uncomfortable, younger girls too. One of them, Miriam, had suddenly stopped going to the mosque. When I asked her mother why, she just looked away. A hard look came over her face, as if my questioning had touched a raw nerve. That should have been enough to alert me. But I kept going, trying to convince myself that maybe I was just being overly sensitive. The truth hit me like a bolt of lightning on a night that had seemed sacred until then. It was the 24th night of Ramadan, one of the most important and spiritually intense of the month. The mosque was full, people fervently praying, every corner filled with devout murmurs. But around midnight, the crowd began to disperse. I was about to leave when the Imam called me over. He said he needed help cleaning the women's section. I didn't hesitate. Why should I? It was him. It had always been him. He asked me to meet him behind the main hall, near the storeroom, a place I had never been before. When I arrived, I found the door ajar. I went in. It was dark. The lights flickered dimly. The smell of incense was stronger, even sickening. The place was stuffy, damp, with boxes piled high and rugs rolled up in the corners. As soon as I stepped inside, I heard the door close behind me with a sharp click. When I turned around, he was already there. There was no Quran in his hands. There was no prayer on his lips, only heavy, almost animal-like breathing. His eyes were dark, hungry. I felt a violent shiver run down my spine. My skin crawled. He took a step forward. "You belong to Allah," he said, his voice hoarse, "but Allah gave you to me to guide." My body froze. My mind screamed to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. He grabbed my hijab, pulling me back with force. The pain in my neck jolted me out of my shock. For a second, I thought I was going to die. I saw my life in flashes, the prayers with my mother, the teachings at the mosque, the silent afternoons. It all seemed ironic now. But at that moment, a memory lit up in me like a spark in the darkness. It was my grandmother's voice, one evening many years ago, saying, "If fear ever tries to silence you, my child, cry out to the sky. It will hear you." And I did. Not in Arabic, not with a surah. I cried out with my soul, "God, help me." It was at that moment that my body reacted. I raised my knee with all the strength I had and kicked him. He stumbled backwards, slipping on the tangled carpet. He fell and hit his head on a metal chair. The sound was dull. The impact, brutal. I didn't even wait. I turned and ran. I ran as if my life depended on it. Because it did. My feet barely touched the ground. The tears were already falling before I even realized it. I only stopped when I reached my house. I locked the door and threw myself on the floor, shaking from head to toe. That night, I cried until my body ached, but I didn't tell anyone. Who would believe me? Who, in a society where religious leaders are treated as untouchables, would listen to a young, silent girl say that the most respected man in the community, the imam, the guide, the guardian of the faith, had hurt me in a way that words could barely explain? The truth was a seed that grew like a thorn in my chest, and the weight of silence began to eat away at everything inside me. I stopped praying. Not out of rebellion, but because my heart fell silent every time my lips opened. I stopped going to the mosque. Just looking at that white building with its dome that had once seemed so pure to me now made me sick. My mother, confused and furious, beat me when I refused to fast the next day. She screamed that I was desecrating my sacred duty. But how could I fast when what was eating me up inside was the bitter taste of disappointment? Then Miriam appeared. She entered my room slowly, her eyes red and her hands shaking. The girl who had disappeared from the mosque without explanation, who everyone said was sick or rebellious, was now there, in front of me, carrying the same weight as me. She didn't speak right away. She sat on the edge of my bed, and her tears began before she could speak. When she finally managed to speak, she said that the imam had touched her too. Not just touched her, he had manipulated her, threatened her, told her that if she told anyone, she would be cursed, that Allah would turn his back on her. She had been carrying this secret for 2 years. 2 years of fear, 2 years of loneliness. When she finished speaking, we stood there, both of us holding each other, crying in the dark. Neither of us needed to explain the pain to the other. It was already written in our eyes. It was then that we decided we could no longer bear this alone. We decided to speak up. Together, we went to the mosque elders. We walked there as if we were going to our own trial. And in a way, we were. We told them everything. The looks on their faces changed. Not to sadness, not to shock, but to anger. Not at the imam, at us. They said we were possessed by evil spirits, that our youth was corrupting us, that we were trying to ruin the honor of a righteous man. Instead of protection, we were given punishment. They made us kneel before him, before the imam, and ask for forgiveness. I had never felt so dirty, so betrayed, so humiliated. That was the last time I entered that mosque, the last time I bowed down to someone in the name of a God who, at that moment, seemed as distant as the stars in the sky. After that, something inside me broke completely. I was no longer the same. I began to seek answers. Not in the words of others, but in silence. I would sneak to the banks of the Nile, always at dusk, when the world seemed to be silent. I would sit on the rocks with my feet touching the warm water, and there, without rituals, without rugs, without rules, I would talk to God. Or I tried to. I would ask him to show me who he was. I would ask if he was really there, and if he was, why he had allowed it. Why did he remain silent when I screamed in that dark room? Why could men who claimed to speak in his name do so much harm without suffering consequences? It was one of those nights that I heard a voice coming from my father's old radio, forgotten in the kitchen. A woman was speaking. She was telling her story with an accent similar to ours, with an emotion that gripped me. She said that she had left Islam after having a dream about Jesus, that he had called her by name, with eyes full of mercy, even when everything around her was in flames. I laughed, a bitter, dry laugh. Jesus? I thought. That's a Christian invention, a lie. But something inside me, something I can't explain, kept me from turning off the radio. I kept listening. My heart was telling me, stay, and I stayed. And there, in that stranger's voice, something began to blossom within me. It wasn't faith, not yet. It was a different kind of hunger. A need to know if this was true, to understand if there was another way. It was the beginning of a silent battle, against my family, against my religion, against myself. After that night in the mosque, I could no longer live the same way. I would sit on the floor of my room for hours, staring at the ceiling as if waiting for an answer to emerge between the cracks. My prayers became dry, empty. My mouth recited the words, but my heart remained silent. It was as if I were speaking into a void. The God who had accompanied me throughout my childhood, the one I had been taught to love and fear, now seemed not only distant, he seemed absent. And with the absence came anger. Anger at myself for having believed so much. Anger at the elders who had silenced me. Anger at my mother, who had beaten me so hard when she learned that I had accused the imam, saying that I had dishonored the family. But most of all, anger at God. I asked questions in silence, questions that I had been taught all my life never to ask. Why was evil allowed in his house? Why could a holy leader touch innocent people and get away with it? Why, when I cried out for help, was there no answer? One night, I walked out of my house in silence. The moon was full, the sky clear. I walked to the river where the water lapped softly against the shore like an ancient whisper. I sat there, alone. The breeze touched my face, and for the first time, I prayed differently. Not in Arabic, not with memorized verses. I simply said, God, if you are truly there, if you still hear me, then show me who you are, because if that is what you allow, I do not want to follow you. It was the truest prayer of my life. The next day, that woman's voice on the radio echoed in my mind. I couldn't get it out of my head. The way she described Jesus, not as a judge, not as a distant God, but as someone who had called out to her from the flames, his eyes full of compassion. And though I wanted to forget it, I found myself wanting to hear more. I began searching, secretly. I would wait for my parents to leave for the grocery store. Then, my heart pounding in my throat, I would run to an internet cafe a few blocks from home. There, with shaking hands, I would search for stories of others like me, former Muslims who had found something different, something new. I lived in fear. The risk was real. If someone saw me, if the cafe owner reported me, I could be beaten, arrested, even killed. But I kept going, story after story. People who, like me, had been hurt within their religion. People who had asked questions and instead of answers, received punishment. And yet, they had found something that felt alive. I didn't know if I believed it, but I wanted to. For the first time in my life, I wanted to believe in something different. And that small spark was the beginning of a new journey, one that would change everything. I kept searching. It was as if, after so many years of walking in darkness, my eyes were finally trying to adjust to the light, a dim, distant, but real light. With each testimony I encountered, I felt something inside me stir. They were men and women like me, Muslims who had lived the same pain, carried the same silences, and somehow found Jesus in the midst of their wounds. At first, it all seemed absurd to me. Part of me screamed, "This is a lie. These are traps of infidels." But the other part, more silent and wounded, begged, "What if it's true?" I didn't know what to do with this conflict, but I knew I couldn't stop. The more I listened, the more that restlessness grew inside me. It was like a distant drum beating deep in my soul, impossible to ignore. One particularly quiet night, I came across a video with Arabic subtitles. It was a man with a calm voice reading a passage from the Bible that I had never heard before, the Gospel of John. I didn't even know what a Bible looked like. I had never touched one. And then he read, The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. Those words hit me like a tidal wave that sweeps everything away. I felt a lump in my throat, as if something that had been bottled up for so long had finally found a way to escape. I paused the video. I wrote down the words on a torn piece of paper. I watched them again, then again, and again. I still didn't fully understand what those words meant, but I felt somewhere deep down that they were speaking to me. I was in darkness, and for the first time, there was a promise of light. A few days later, something I never would have predicted happened. I went out to buy tea on a quiet street near my home, a simple, almost hidden shop that I had never paid much attention to. The person who served me was a woman with kind eyes and a serene smile. Her name was Ila. She handed me the tea bag, and before I turned to leave, she looked into my eyes as if she could see beyond the surface. "You have sadness in your eyes. Are you okay, my sister?" Those words, so simple, broke something inside me. I wanted to say yes, but I couldn't lie. Not anymore. I just nodded, swallowing back the tears, and turned to leave. But before I had taken 2 steps, she called me. "Come back tomorrow. I want to give you something." I almost didn't go back. Doubt was eating away at me, but some force kept pulling me along. The next day, I went. When I arrived, Ila greeted me with the same calm look and handed me a small, discreet black book with a cross engraved on the cover. It was a Bible. My hands began to tremble just holding it. It was like holding something forbidden, dangerous. My heart raced. Ila just smiled and said with gentle firmness, "Don't be afraid of the truth. It won't burn you. It will save you." I went home with that book hidden among my clothes. That night, I hid it under my bed. I didn't touch it for 2 days. I was afraid. Afraid that my father would find it. Afraid that it was a trap. But above all, afraid that the truth was all too real. Curiosity, however, overcame fear. One sleepless night, I opened the Bible for the first time. I chose the book of Luke, a name that seemed neutral, less threatening. And the first story I read was about a woman caught in adultery. The religious leaders wanted to stone her. And then Jesus said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And one by one, they backed away. I felt a warmth rise in my chest. My eyes filled with tears. I didn't cry because I saw myself as a sinner. I cried because, for the first time, I read about a holy man who didn't destroy a broken woman. He defended her. He protected her. I whispered through my tears, "Who are you, Jesus?" That's when the dreams began. The first dream was short but terrifying. I was in the mosque, the very one where my innocence had been shattered, but it was on fire. The walls were black, covered in soot. The air was heavy, hard to breathe. And the call to prayer, which had always been familiar, was distorted, playing backwards, as if it were being swallowed by hell itself. I tried to get out, but the smoke blinded me. I fell to my knees, desperate. I screamed for help, and then a hand appeared in front of me. I couldn't see the person's face, just a white robe and scarred hands with scars on the wrists. He pulled me out. I woke up in a panic, my entire body drenched in sweat. I sat there, sitting on the bed, shaking, trying to convince myself that it was just a nightmare. But the dreams continued. The second, the third, always the same presence, the same hands, the same robe. And sometimes a voice would whisper something I didn't understand, but it gave me peace. I tried to ignore it. I tried to say it was just my trauma manifesting, my mind trying to make sense of the chaos. But no matter how much I fought it, every time I closed my eyes, he was there, waiting for me, calling me. Finally, one night when my soul felt breathless, I knelt on the floor of my dark room, trembling, and whispered, "Jesus, if you're real, show me." And that night, he showed. I dreamed that I was standing in front of a crowd. My family, my neighbors, Imam Idris. They were all shouting, calling me a traitor, an infidel. They were throwing stones. My arms covered my face as I begged for mercy. The stones came furiously. I felt the pain, not just physical pain, but the pain of being rejected, humiliated, condemned. Then he appeared, Jesus. He stood between me and them, like a shield. He opened his arms. The stones began to hit him. I saw the blood. I saw the pain in his eyes. But I also saw something that broke me inside. Compassion. He was being hurt by me, and he wouldn't back down. I woke up sobbing. At that moment, I knew he was not just a character in a foreign tale. He was not an invention. He was real. And in some inexplicable way, he loved me. Blood trickled down his forehead, dripping slowly, mixing with the dust of my nightmares. Still, he looked at me and smiled. A smile that was not earthly, not forced, not relieved, not resistant. It was the smile of someone who knew the end of the story and was not afraid. "You are mine," he said, with a tenderness that broke through every remaining defense inside me. I woke up with my body shaking and my chest heaving, sobbing like a lost child who has just been found. For a moment, I couldn't breathe, but through the tears, I knew. I still didn't have all the answers. There was still fear, many doubts, and an avalanche of uncertainty about what was to come. But one thing only, was crystal clear at that moment. This Jesus, he wasn't what I had been taught. He wasn't just another prophet. He was the Savior. And somehow, I wanted to know him more than anything else. The next day, not knowing what to do with this new longing that was burning inside me, I went back to Ila's little shop. She welcomed me with the same calmness as before, as if she had been expecting my return. I approached her, nervous, and with a choked voice I asked, "How can I follow him?" She didn't answer right away. She held my hands affectionately and smiled. Not just any smile, but the kind of smile that only mothers know how to give when a lost child finally returns home. "Say yes," she said, her eyes shining. "That's all he's waiting for." Behind a faded curtain, at the back of the store, was a small room, simple and quiet. On the floor, a prayer rug. For a moment, my body hesitated. How many times have I knelt on a rug like that, but in a different direction? In other words, seeking another God. But this time, I did not look at Mecca. I looked at the sky, and for the first time, with a heart stripped of ritual, I spoke from the depths of my soul. "Jesus, I believe that you are the Son of God. Save me. Take my heart. I am yours." There was no thunder. No light broke through the ceiling. But inside me, something that felt ancient, bound and rusty broke. Invisible chains loosened, and a light wind, impossible to explain, ran through my chest. For the first time in my life, I felt free, truly free. But I had no idea the price that yes would bring. When I left the store, everything looked the same. The street was still dusty, the sun was shining as always, and the wind blew my scarf as lightly as it had yesterday. But inside, everything had changed. I had said yes to Jesus, and that yes, I knew, would soon destroy everything my life had been up to that moment. I walked home as if I were walking on thin glass. I sat at the table, ate dinner with my family, smiled when my little brother asked me to braid his hair. But inside, I could hear a storm approaching, muffled thunder beyond the mountains. That night, I hid my Bible carefully, wrapped in a cloth and tucked between my mattresses. I whispered prayers that didn't feel like prayers, at least not the way I had learned them. They weren't memorized verses, they weren't repetitions, they were conversations, honest, fragile. "Jesus, I don't know how to pray like Christians, but give me strength." And he did. For a few nights, I managed to keep this new world hidden, until the storm hit. It started with a small detail, an innocent gesture. My mother, changing the sheets on my mattress, felt something strange. Her fingers found the hidden volume, and when she pulled the cloth away and saw the Bible, she screamed as if she had been bitten by a snake. She ran to my father in shock, holding the book as if it were poison. Within minutes, the door to my room was broken down. They entered together, their eyes full of terror. My mother was shaking. My father looked like a storm about to explode. "What is this, Zara?" she screamed, shaking the book in the air. "What curse is this that you have brought into our house?" I couldn't lie anymore. "It's mine," I replied, my voice weak but firm. The silence that followed was like the sound of a building collapsing from within. And then the slap came, quick, violent, full of pain and fear. The taste of blood spread across my mouth. My father's eyes, those eyes that had for years given me security, were now filled with hatred, with shame. "You have brought a curse upon this house," he shouted. "You will burn this book. You will kneel and ask Allah for forgiveness." But I, even though my face was throbbing, shaking, bleeding, whispered, "I will not burn it, I believe." I didn't even finish my sentence. He pushed me hard, and when I fell, he kicked me. My body curled up, trying to protect my ribs, my head, whatever I could. My brothers came running in, trying to push him away. My mother cried against the wall, saying things I could barely hear. That night, they locked me in my room. No water, no food, no comfort. From the other side of the door, I could hear the whispers. She's possessed. She's dishonored us. We have to take her to the sheikh. But what chilled my soul was my uncle's voice. She's an apostate. Let her be stoned. My own blood saying it. I didn't sleep, not even for a minute. I knelt down, hurt, hungry, alone. And once again, I spoke to the one who was now my only certainty. Jesus, I have chosen you. If my life ends here, I am not afraid. Just don't abandon me. My body ached, but my spirit was standing. Then something unexpected happened. In the middle of the night, a light breeze blew through the window. The curtains swayed slowly. And then I heard a voice, whispered but clear. Zara, get up. My eyes widened. It was Layla's son, a neighbor of ours, a silent shadow in the darkness. He was there, at the window, risking everything. And in that moment I knew my escape was beginning. She had sent him with a ladder and a scarf to disguise himself. I didn't hesitate. I grabbed my Bible and my sandals and left. I ran without looking back. The familiar streets disappeared, replaced by dark alleys and back roads. Every footstep echoed too loudly in the silence of the night. My heart beat like an impatient drum. Every dog bark, every distant sound of footsteps made me shudder, made me fear the worst. I left behind everything I knew. My home, my bed, my mother's face, my little brother's smile. Every memory of the past weighed like an anchor, but I knew that if I stayed here, I would die. Illa hid me in an old guest house, dusty, abandoned, and smelling strongly of mold. It wasn't a palace, it wasn't a comfortable refuge, but it was safe. For 3 days I stayed there, locked between those walls that barely protected the body, but welcomed the heart. Illa delicately brought food, and on silent nights we prayed together, whispering in whispers. She told me that what I was experiencing was nothing new, that many had been on the same path. Jesus himself said that they will hate you because of me, she said, her gaze firm. But he also promised, I will be with you always, until the end of time. I clung to those words like someone holding on to a rope in a storm, but the storm was far from over. On the 4th day, there was a knock on the guest house door, a sharp, insistent sound. No, Illa, not her son. I whispered, freezing. My heart sank in my chest. I stood still, breathless. Then I heard a voice, sharp as a knife. Do you think you can hide from Allah, Zara? It was the mother of Idris, the imam who had rejected me. He had found me. I held my breath, didn't move, didn't blink. I just waited, praying that they wouldn't find out where I was. Finally, the voice moved away. He was gone, but I knew my time there was numbered. That same night, Illa helped me organize my final escape. A contact from a small Christian mission in another city agreed to take me in. It was a huge risk. The roads were guarded and patrolled, but there was no alternative. I used a nickname to hide my face. At the bus stop, Illa hugged me tightly, whispering in my ear, "Don't forget your name. Don't forget who saved you." I cried in her arms. Illa was the only one who believed in me, the only one who saw me as someone worthy of being saved, not as a disgrace to be forgotten. The drive was long and tense. I stared out the window as the world passed by too quickly for me to take in. I thought about everything: my father's anger, my mother's tears, the burning mosque in my dreams, the blood on Jesus' forehead before me, and in the midst of it all, the peace he gave me. I arrived at the mission house before dawn. It was simple and quiet. Other girls were there, some from Egypt, some from Somalia. They all had similar stories of escape, betrayal, pain, but also of hope. That first night, we cried together, and for the first time in weeks, I slept without fear. The next morning, we had a small prayer meeting. Someone read from the Gospel of Matthew, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." I burst into tears. That promise seemed to be made just for me. Days passed. I learned more about Jesus, not just through dreams, but through his word, his love, his sacrifice, his power, his truth. I asked questions I had never dared to ask before. Why would he die for me? Why would a sinless man bear my shame? Slowly, I began to understand. This wasn't a religion. It was a relationship. It wasn't about laws, but about love. But love has its price. Word of my escape spread quickly. I was no longer just the girl who had disappeared. I was the girl who had betrayed Islam. In some parts of the world, that is a death sentence. I began receiving messages, veiled threats, explicit warnings. Each word was a blow to the heart, a constant reminder of the danger I was in. People in my village said I would be hunted, that I was worse than a pimp, that I had insulted the Prophet and dishonored my family. And then came the worst. A picture of my little brother tied up, crying. A message below, "Go back to where he pays." I broke down. I felt like everything inside me was breaking again. I screamed, I cried, I pounded on the wall until my fists bled. I wanted to go back, not to go back to Islam, but to save my brother. But the leaders at the mission house sat me down and said, "Zara, the enemy wants to destroy you, but Jesus has already won. You need to trust in him." I prayed like never before. "Jesus, save him." "I can't, but you can." And then something happened again. That night, I had another dream. My brother was standing in the middle of the street, alone, scared. Then Jesus appeared beside him, without saying a word, just holding his hand. I woke up in tears. 2 days later, I got a message. He had escaped. They didn't know how, but he was found near a farm on the outskirts of town, injured but alive. The gospel was becoming more than words now. It was life, it was power, and I would never turn back. But this was only the middle of the journey. What came next would test my faith more than anything else. I would have to come forward publicly. I would have to speak to the world, to the church, to the very people who wanted me dead. There comes a time when silence no longer brings me security. I was in hiding for months. The mission house gave me shelter, food, friendship, and discipleship. I began to learn to read the Bible on my own. I memorized scriptures as if my life depended on it, because it did. Each verse was like a sigh to my soul, but one day I felt the Lord speak to my heart. Not loudly, just a silent burden that I couldn't shake. "Zara, tell your story." I didn't want to. I was scared. I had already lost everything. My family, my home, my identity. Telling the world what had happened could bring even more danger. But I remembered something the pastor at the mission house told me. God didn't save you from the fire so you could hide in the shadows. You are his light now. So I said yes. My first public sharing took place in a small church on the outskirts of town. It was mostly women, some of them also ex-Muslims. I stood in front of them, my hands shaking and my eyes filling with tears before I could even speak. I used to follow a man who I thought was righteous, a holy man, a trustworthy imam, but he tried to defile me in the house of God. Gasps filled the room. Some covered their mouths. Others leaned forward, eyes wide with sadness and anger. And I ran. But not just from him. I ran into the arms of Jesus. That day, women cried with me. They prayed for me. Some even came up to me after the service and said, "Me too." But not everyone was moved by compassion. The recording of my testimony somehow made it onto the internet. It spread like wildfire, on Facebook, WhatsApp, Telegram. And with it came the negative reaction. My family put me down again, this time publicly. My father recorded a message calling me dead, saying that I had brought shame to the lineage. My brothers posted pictures of my face, branded with the word traitor burned into them as a warning to everyone who knew me. I could no longer even go to the grocery store without covering every inch of my face. Scarves, veils, anything to try to disappear. But that wasn't enough. Shame and fear haunted me. One day, as I was crossing a side street, a man silently followed me. When I found myself cornered against a cold wall, he spat in my face. "Do you think Isa is God? May you rot in hell along with your infidel friends," he shouted with hatred, his face distorted with contempt. I screamed too, a scream of fear and anger. People nearby heard the commotion and rushed to help. The man fled before they could reach him. But that moment shook me to my core. I wanted nothing more than to crawl back to the safe haven of the mission house, to hide from the world that now seemed so cruel. That night, alone, I cried until I had no more tears. I begged Jesus, "Why me? Why do I have to suffer so much just because I believe in you?" The pain seemed unbearable. And then, in an instant, I blindly opened the Bible. My eyes fell on a verse in Philippians. "For to you it has been granted on behalf of Christ not only to believe in him, but also to suffer for his sake. I read those words slowly, each word a sharp blade that cut through the doubt in my heart. To suffer for him. Not because I had done anything wrong, but because I was finally doing something right. I felt a deep peace come over me. Suffering didn't mean I was abandoned. It meant I had been chosen. That same week, I received a message from a woman named Miriam, who was the leader of an underground church in another part of the country. She had seen my testimony online. She asked if I would share my story with her group. It was too risky, but I felt the Holy Spirit guiding me. I traveled with 2 other believers. We took back roads, hid our faces, and used coded language so as not to be discovered. When I arrived, I found a small room full of women. Some were in tears, others were holding children in their arms, all hungry to hear a word of hope. I spoke again, this time with more boldness, more conviction than ever before. I didn't just tell him what the imam did. I told him what Jesus did for me, how he found me in the darkness, how he carried me through the fire, how he gave me a new life. At the end, a young girl, perhaps 16 years old, stood up. Her voice was shaking, but her eyes shone with courage. I was attacked by our local clergyman. I never told anyone. I thought I would go to hell if I spoke, but now I know I am not alone. That night, 4 women gave their lives to Jesus. We worshipped in silence, in whispers, with tears streaming down our faces. But the enemy was watching. The next day, I learned that someone had reported the encounter. 2 of the women were arrested. I barely escaped. We were scattered again, some to different houses, some to the hills, always running, always hiding. But we had experienced something eternal, something that no prison, no threat could take away from us. And it was at that moment that I knew I would not hide again. I would not remain silent. If my voice could help just one girl escape the lie, discover the truth, then it would all be worth it. I began to record my story in secret, not just for churches, but for the internet. I posted videos under a fake name, covered my face, changed my voice, but the truth was clear and unshakable. I spoke about how I had bowed 5 times a day with sincerity, memorized surahs with devotion, trusted my imam more than anyone else in the world, and how it was this same imam who tried to desecrate me in a holy place while I was pronouncing the name of Allah. And as the one I had rejected, Jesus was the one who came to seek me, who loved me, who saved me. The videos began to reach thousands, then millions. I started receiving messages from faraway places: Morocco, Turkey, Pakistan, Nigeria, Sudan. Muslim girls wrote, "I saw you in my dream last night. I felt trapped too, stuck in a maze with no way out, not knowing how to find Jesus in this world that seemed to suffocate me at every turn. How do I find Jesus?" I wrote to myself, trying to understand. My mother, who had once been my protector, was now involved in dark things with other girls in the village: rituals, pressures, veiled threats. I was afraid to even talk about it, for fear that my words would be used against me. But something profound happened inside me. The pain I had been carrying, which had felt like a crushing burden, began to transform into a weapon, not to destroy people, but to tear down lies, to break the chains of oppression that bound me and so many others. I was growing in faith, but with that growth came a new danger. A cruel fatwa was issued against me. My head became a bounty for anyone who wanted to silence me. I had no choice but to flee again, change my name, leave the safety of the mission house behind, and enter a new life of anonymity and constant surveillance. But I wasn't afraid anymore, because every time I opened my mouth to testify, to speak about Jesus, the light that emanated dispelled the darkness that surrounded me. One night I received a message that changed everything. It belonged to Imam Idris's wife. She wrote, "I saw your videos. I didn't want to believe you, but deep down I knew. I saw what he did, not just to you, but to many others, even our niece. I'm leaving him. I want to know this Jesus you speak of." I fell to my knees in shock. Even from a distance, God was using my voice. He was reaching places I could never reach on my own. And then I realized something profound. The very place where I had been violated, the very place that was supposed to be my grave, had now become the center of my victory. The very man who had tried to destroy me had become the reason I now spoke. God had turned my shame into strength, but the cost was not over yet. Soon, someone very close to me would betray me. My life would be in danger again. I had learned to live with danger, to sleep lightly, to pray before each step, to expect betrayal lurking around the corner. But nothing could prepare me for what happened next. It came from the person I least expected. Her name was Sophia. She had been my friend for many years, even before I had seen the mission house. She was like a sister, one of the few people I trusted completely. I had shared my story with her, confided my fears, taken her to secret meetings where we talked about Jesus and hope. She cried with me. She held my hand. We prayed together. But over time, something changed. Sophia became distant, cold, as if a shadow had enveloped her. She began to ask strange, suspicious questions. Where are you staying now? Do you still talk to the mission house? At first, I didn't think much of it. But then one day, she disappeared. 2 days later, a reliable source tipped me off. Someone had been paid to track me down, to turn me in. And then there was a knock at the door. He wasn't a visitor. He wasn't a friend. There were 3 men, closed faces, hard eyes. One of them had a scar on his cheek that seemed to tell stories of violence. Another was holding a heavy, threatening cloth bag. They didn't say a word. They forced their way in. They tied my hands with rough ropes and covered my face with a cold, damp cloth, and they dragged me out of the house. I couldn't scream. My mouth was gagged. My heart was in a tight knot of fear. I was thrown into a van like discarded trash. As the engine roared, I heard one of them whisper, "The imam will deal with her alone. I don't know how long we drive." My chest was pounding like thunder. I couldn't breathe properly. I whispered Jesus' name under the gag over and over. Jesus, Jesus, Jesus. Finally, we stopped. I was pulled out of the van, pushed into a room that smelled of sweat and stale smoke. When the gag was removed, I blinked hard, trying to adjust my eyes to the dim light. And there he was, Imam Idris. Older now, with a grayer beard, hair flecked with white. But those eyes, cold, calculating, the same ones that had looked at me like prey all those years ago. He smiled slowly, an icy, menacing smile. Then he said in a firm voice full of contempt, "You've become quite famous, little Zara." He circled me, like a vulture sniffing out its prey. "I trusted you. I taught you. And now you spit on everything I gave you. You have led others astray. You have poisoned my name. That's why." He paused for a long, heavy moment, as if each word cost him an enormous effort. His voice dropped to a sharp whisper, filled with pent-up hatred. "You will die." I wanted to cry. I screamed inside, but I didn't let my voice out. Instead, I said something I never thought I would have the courage to say. "You can kill my body, but you have already lost. You have no power over me. Jesus has already won." His face contorted, anger taking over. In one brutal blow, he slapped me so hard that my head lolled to the side, dazed. "You filthy apostate," he shouted. "Do you think your Isa can save you now?" But I just looked at him, my eyes filled with tears I couldn't hold back, and replied firmly, "He already saved me." He stormed off, giving cold, calculating orders for the men to prepare me for the desert. I didn't know what it meant, but fear gripped me. I had a terrifying feeling. They were taking me to die. Just before they dragged me out, I said one last silent, deep, desperate prayer. "God, I'm not afraid of dying, but if there's still something for me to do here, please free me." Then came the explosion. It was loud, blinding. A white flash flooded everything, and a shockwave shook the ground and walls around it. Cracks spread like veins throughout the structure as the lights suddenly went out. Screams of panic and pain echoed around me. Shots. Chaos. I was on the floor, curled up in a ball, praying every word I could remember. That's when I heard a clear, calm, yet urgent voice. "Zara, Zara, are you here?" It was a rescue team, a Christian group that had been alerted by a secret believer within the imam's inner circle. They stormed the place just in time, saving me at the last second. I was carried away barely conscious as smoke and screams filled the air behind me. I had been saved again, this time publicly and definitively. The news spread quickly through local media outlets. The hiding place where my mother tried to protect me classified the preacher as rescued from execution. They didn't mention my name, but whoever needed to know, knew. I hid again, this time with a new identity, in a different country, a place where I could finally breathe. But silence would never again be an option. I continued to share my story. I traveled to speak at underground churches, women's conferences, refugee camps. I sat with girls who, like me, had been broken, bleeding, confused. And he said to them, "There is someone who sees you, someone who calls you daughter even when you feel lost in the darkness. His name is Jesus. Today I speak to you not as a victim, but as a voice. I speak to the Muslim girl who cries silently, thinking that Allah is angry that she has made mistakes. I speak to the man who doubts, who questions the things he sees in his own mosque, but does not know where to turn. I speak to those who have tried to escape pain by memorizing prayers, hoping to find peace, but have found only silence and emptiness. There is more. There is hope. There is a Savior. He's not the type to use you. He's the type who will die for you. He died on the cross so that you no longer have to carry shame, guilt, or fear. My name is Zara. I was once a devout Muslim. I loved my Imam more than myself until the day he showed me who he really was, and I met Jesus. He gave me a new life, a life no one can take away. And now I give this life, even if it costs me everything, because I've already found the one thing no one can steal. Not a knife, not a bullet, not even betrayal. His name is Jesus, and he's worth it all.